The sprawling glass towers of Keystone Industries stood like a beacon in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Inside, beneath the glossy veneer of polished floors and power suits, there lay an invisible hierarchy, rigid and unyielding. This was a world of boardrooms, investors, and cutthroat deals, but far below the thrum of corporate ambition, in the quiet shadows, worked Clara Benson. Clara was a 54-year-old cleaning lady. To most of the executives passing her by, she was just another uniformed worker, easily ignored and just as easily replaced. But Clara was more than she appeared. She carried herself with quiet dignity, the kind forged in the fires of relentless struggle. Widowed young, she had raised 3 children while working 2 jobs, balancing dreams for their futures against the harsh reality of living paycheck to paycheck. Her days at Keystone began before dawn, scrubbing the gleaming hallways, cleaning meeting rooms where million-dollar deals were struck, and tending to offices adorned with accolades and degrees. But Clara had a secret. Over the years, she had watched and listened. No one paid attention to the cleaning lady, and that anonymity was her strength. She overheard conversations, noticed discrepancies, and saw the careless paperwork left out on desks. One day, as she emptied the trash in the CEO's office, her sharp eyes caught something strange. A memo marked confidential revealed plans to slash hundreds of jobs. The cuts would disproportionately affect workers at the lowest levels of the company, people like her friends in the maintenance crew. Worse yet, the memo hinted at an insider trading scandal, a scheme designed to enrich top executives while leaving ordinary employees in the dust. Clara felt a storm brewing in her chest. She had always been a woman of faith, turning to prayer in times of struggle. That night, she prayed not only for guidance but for the courage to act. As she closed her Bible, her late husband's words echoed in her mind, "You're stronger than they'll ever see coming." This time, Clara wasn't going to stay invisible. Clara's decision to act didn't come lightly. She knew the risks. People like her, Black, working-class women, were often dismissed or punished for speaking up in spaces dominated by wealth and power. But she also knew that remaining silent would only make her complicit in the injustice. Her first step was to gather more evidence. Over the next few weeks, Clara's routine didn't change on the surface. She still cleaned with precision, humming gospel hymns under her breath, but her sharp mind was constantly at work. Every conversation she overheard, every piece of discarded paper, and every suspicious email left on an unlocked computer became a piece of the puzzle. She started carrying a small notebook in her cleaning cart, jotting down details in shorthand, careful never to draw attention to herself. What she uncovered confirmed her worst fears. Keystone Industries was in trouble, and the CEO, Mitchell Grayson, was planning to save his skin at the expense of the most vulnerable employees. Grayson, a man in his late 40s with a penchant for expensive suits and ruthless ambition, had orchestrated a scheme to inflate the company's stock value artificially. Once the plan succeeded, he and his closest allies would sell their shares, leaving the company, and its employees, in ruins. Clara didn't know much about corporate law, but she knew enough to realize this was illegal. Her faith told her to seek justice, but where would she begin? One night, Clara confided in her youngest daughter, Naomi, a tech-savvy college student studying cybersecurity. Naomi was shocked at what her mother had uncovered but quickly offered her help. "Mom, if this is what you say it is, you need to protect yourself first. These people won't play fair." Naomi helped Clara copy files and emails from computers she had access to during her cleaning rounds, storing the information securely on a flash drive. Clara's hands trembled as she worked, but she kept repeating her late husband's words to herself like a mantra, "You're stronger than they'll ever see coming." But Clara knew evidence wasn't enough. She needed someone powerful to take this to, someone who couldn't be bought off or intimidated. That's when she thought of a mess. Regina Carter, a former Keystone executive who had been forced out years ago under mysterious circumstances. Regina had since become a fierce advocate for corporate accountability, known for exposing corruption in the business world. With Naomi's help, Clara reached out to Regina via an anonymous email, attaching a few of the documents she had gathered. Regina's response came quickly, "We need to talk. Your information could bring down giants, but we have to move carefully. Meet me in person." The next Sunday, Clara made her way to a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Regina Carter was waiting for her, an imposing woman in her 60s with a sharp gaze and a no-nonsense demeanor. Clara felt small and out of place at first, but as she began to explain what she had found, Regina leaned forward, her expression shifting from skepticism to admiration. "You've done more than most people in your position ever would," Regina said, her voice steady. "This is dangerous, Clara. But if we expose this the right way, you'll not only save your job, you'll save hundreds of others, maybe thousands. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" Clara hesitated. She thought of the friends she worked alongside every day, people who had become like family. She thought of her faith, her children, and the legacy she wanted to leave behind. Then she nodded. "I'm ready." Over the next few weeks, Clara and Regina worked together to build their case. Regina brought in a team of trusted legal and financial experts to analyze the evidence. Clara continued her work at Keystone, now operating with the precision of a spy. She had to be careful. If anyone suspected her, the fallout could be disastrous. But suspicion was already growing. One evening, as Clara emptied trash bins on the executive floor, she noticed Grayson watching her from his office. His piercing gaze lingered just a moment too long, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Later that night, she found an envelope tucked into her locker. Inside was a single note: "Mind your business." Clara's faith was her anchor during these moments of fear. She prayed for protection, for wisdom, and for the strength to see this through. Regina assured her that they were making progress, but Clara knew the clock was ticking. Grayson and his allies were growing more desperate by the day. One day, while cleaning an unused conference room, Clara stumbled across a flash drive left plugged into a computer. Her instincts told her this was important. She pocketed the drive and later gave it to Naomi, who discovered it contained a detailed blueprint of Grayson's entire scheme, including secret offshore accounts. This was the smoking gun they needed. As Regina prepared to go public, Clara braced herself for the storm. Clara's life grew increasingly precarious as the days passed. The closer Regina's team got to completing their case, the more Clara felt the walls closing in. Grayson and his allies were no fools. They had begun to suspect a leak. Security measures at Keystone Industries tightened, and whispers of an inside trader floated around the office. Clara maintained her composure, but her heart raced every time she caught a colleague's wary glance or overheard a hushed conversation among executives. One evening, as Clara finished her rounds, she found herself face to face with Jacob Trent, Keystone's chief operating officer and Grayson's right-hand man. A tall, imposing figure, Jacob was known for his sharp intellect and ruthless efficiency. He blocked her path, his expression cold and unreadable. "Clara, isn't it?" he said, his tone unnervingly casual. "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I've noticed you've been diligent lately," Jacob continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Always in the right place at the right time. That's commendable." Clara smiled politely, masking her unease. "Just doing my job, sir." Jacob's gaze lingered for a moment before he stepped aside. "Keep up the good work," he said, though the underlying menace in his tone was unmistakable. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She replayed the interaction in her mind, wondering if she had given herself away. Naomi reassured her, urging her to trust in their plan and stay the course. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The following morning, as she entered the building, she noticed a new addition: security guards stationed on every floor, their eyes scanning each employee with unsettling intensity. When Clara reached her locker, she found it ajar, its contents in disarray. She froze, her pulse quickening. Someone had searched her things. Clara reported the incident to HR, masking her fear with frustration. "I don't know what they were looking for, but I don't appreciate my privacy being violated," she said firmly. The HR representative assured her they would look into it, but Clara knew better. This was a warning. Meanwhile, Regina and her team were finalizing their case. The evidence was damning: forged documents, fraudulent transactions, and communications that tied Grayson directly to the scheme. Regina's connections in the media were eager to break the story, but she insisted on waiting for the perfect moment. "We need to make this airtight," she told Clara during one of their secret meetings. "Once this goes public, they'll do everything they can to discredit us." But Grayson was already on the offensive. That week, Clara noticed several of her coworkers being pulled aside by HR for routine meetings. By the end of the week, two of them, both longtime employees, were abruptly fired. The official explanation was performance issues, but Clara knew the truth. They were scapegoats, sacrificed to create the illusion of accountability while Grayson continued his schemes unchecked. The firing sent a ripple of fear through the staff. Even Clara's closest friends began avoiding her, unwilling to risk association with someone who might be under scrutiny. The isolation was painful, but Clara reminded herself of why she was fighting. She thought of the janitors, receptionists, and warehouse workers who relied on Keystone for their livelihoods. They couldn't fight for themselves, but she could. One afternoon, as Clara cleaned the executive floor, she noticed something unusual. Grayson's office door was ajar, and the man himself was nowhere to be seen. Her instincts told her to keep walking, but curiosity got the better of her. She slipped inside, her eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. On his desk was a folder labeled Project Phoenix. Clara's breath caught. She had heard that name mentioned before in hushed tones. Without thinking, she opened the folder and quickly scanned its contents. It was worse than she had imagined. Project Phoenix was the code name for the layoffs, and the documents detailed how the company planned to outsource jobs overseas while pocketing the savings. Suddenly, a voice behind her broke the silence. "Looking for something?" Clara spun around to find Grayson standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of amusement and suspicion. Her heart pounded as she struggled to come up with an excuse. "I was just tidying up," she said, forcing a smile. Grayson stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. "You know, Clara, it's funny how often you seem to be in the middle of things that don't concern you." Before she could respond, Grayson leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Stay out of my way, or you'll regret it." That night, Clara broke down for the first time. She had faced hardship before, but this was different. The stakes were higher, and the threats were more personal. She turned to her faith, praying for strength and guidance. Her late husband's words echoed in her mind again, reminding her of the resilience that had carried her this far. The next day, Clara returned to work with renewed determination. She knew she couldn't back down, not now. Regina's team was ready to go public, and Clara had one final task: deliver the Project Phoenix documents to complete the case. It was risky, but Clara was prepared to risk everything for justice. As she slipped the documents into her bag, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The storm was coming, but she was ready. The storm arrived sooner than Clara expected. The morning started like any other: cold coffee, early hours, and the hum of Keystone Industries coming to life. But by noon, the tension in the air was palpable. Something was wrong. Employees whispered in hushed tones, and executives scurried about with grim expressions. Clara continued her work, trying to blend in, but her nerves were on edge. At 2 p.m., the company's intercom crackled to life. Grayson's deep, authoritative voice filled the building. "Attention, all employees. Due to recent concerns about corporate security, a mandatory meeting will be held in the main conference room at 3 p.m. Attendance is required." Clara's heart sank. She had been in enough meetings to know that security concerns often meant bad news. She glanced at her cart, where the Project Phoenix documents were hidden beneath a stack of cleaning supplies. If this meeting was a trap, she needed to act fast. At 3 p.m., the entire staff packed into the conference room. Clara stood at the back, clutching her cleaning cart like a lifeline. Grayson took the stage, flanked by Jacob Trent and a few other senior executives. His expression was calm, almost smug, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Thank you all for joining us on short notice," he began, his voice steady. "As you know, Keystone Industries is committed to maintaining the highest standards of integrity and security. Unfortunately, we have reason to believe that confidential company information has been compromised." The room fell silent. Clara's grip tightened on her cart as Grayson's gaze swept over the crowd. "We are conducting an internal investigation," he continued. "Effective immediately, all employees will be required to turn over their company-issued devices for inspection. Additionally, random locker searches will be conducted throughout the day." A murmur of unease rippled through the crowd. Clara's mind raced. The Project Phoenix documents were still in her bag, and if her locker was searched, it would be over. She needed to move quickly, but discreetly. As the meeting ended, employees filed out, their conversations a mix of confusion and anxiety. Clara pushed her cart down the hallway, her thoughts a blur. She needed to get the documents to Regina, but with the increased security, slipping out unnoticed would be nearly impossible. Suddenly, a voice called out behind her. "Clara!" She turned to see Jacob Trent approaching, his expression unreadable. "Yes, sir?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'll need to see you in my office," he said curtly. Clara's pulse quickened, but she nodded. Of course. Jacob's office was a sleek, intimidating space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. He gestured for Clara to sit, but she remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. "Clara," Jacob began, his tone almost friendly. "You've been with Keystone for a long time, haven't you?" "Nearly 10 years, she replied. "And in that time, you've been a model employee. Dependable, hardworking." "Thank you, sir." Jacob leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "That's why I'm giving you a chance to come clean." Clara's stomach dropped. "You see," Jacob continued, "we know someone has been accessing sensitive information. Someone who doesn't belong. Now, I don't want to believe it's you, Clara, but people talk." For a moment, the room was silent. Clara met Jacob's gaze, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what you mean," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. Jacob studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "I hope that's true," he said, standing. "For your sake." As Clara left his office, her legs felt like jelly. She had managed to deflect suspicion, but she knew her time was running out. Back in the janitorial closet, Clara made a decision. She grabbed the Project Phoenix documents from her bag and tucked them into a padded envelope. Then, she scrawled a quick note to Regina. "This is everything. Make it count." She placed the envelope in her cart and headed for the mailroom, her heart pounding with every step. But as she rounded a corner, she froze. 2 security guards were stationed outside the mailroom, their eyes scanning everyone who passed. Clara quickly turned and walked the other way, her mind racing. If she couldn't use the mailroom, she needed another plan. That night, under the cover of darkness, Clara made her move. She left Keystone through a side exit, the envelope tucked securely in her coat. Naomi was waiting for her in the car, and together they drove to Regina's office. Regina was waiting for them, her expression a mix of relief and determination. "This is it?" she asked, taking the envelope. Clara nodded. "Everything you need to bring him down." Regina smiled, her eyes glinting with resolve. "You've done your part, Clara. Now it's my turn." The next morning, the story broke. Headlines across the country screamed of corruption at Keystone Industries, detailing the layoffs, offshore accounts, and insider trading. Grayson's name was plastered across every news outlet, along with damning evidence of his crimes. At Keystone, chaos erupted. Employees gathered around their phones and computers, reading the story with a mix of shock and anger. Clara kept her head down, pretending to be as surprised as everyone else. But Grayson wasn't going down without a fight. That afternoon, he called an emergency board meeting, determined to spin the narrative in his favor. Clara, however, knew it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. Keystone Industries was in freefall. The article exposing Mitchell Grayson's corruption had gone viral, its damning details sparking outrage from employees, investors, and the public. News cameras swarmed the building, their lenses capturing the chaos unfolding inside. Grayson, once untouchable, now appeared rattled, pacing his office as he barked orders into his phone. Clara watched from a distance, blending into the background as she always did. But this time, she wasn't invisible. Her coworkers, many of whom had avoided her in recent weeks, now looked at her with curiosity and, in some cases, respect. Rumors had begun circulating. Someone on the inside had exposed Grayson's scheme. While no one could confirm it, whispers of Clara's involvement grew louder with each passing hour. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was called. Grayson stood at the front of the room, flanked by his remaining loyalists. His usual confident demeanor was replaced with a veneer of barely concealed panic. "Let me make one thing clear," he began, his voice strained but commanding. "These accusations are baseless. Keystone Industries operates with the highest level of integrity, and we will prove that in due course." Murmurs of skepticism rippled through the crowd. Employees exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright disdain. Grayson continued, his tone hardening. "I will not tolerate disloyalty. Anyone found spreading false information or collaborating with outside parties will face immediate termination." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Clara remained silent, her face a mask of indifference. But inside, her anger burned. Grayson's attempts to intimidate his employees only strengthened her resolve. In the days that followed, the fallout intensified. Keystone's stock plummeted, wiping out millions of dollars in shareholder value. Investors demanded answers, and the board of directors convened a series of tense meetings to discuss Grayson's fate. Outside the building, protesters gathered, their chants echoing through the glass walls. Regina kept Clara updated from behind the scenes. "The board is panicking," she said during one of their late-night phone calls. "Grayson's trying to pin the blame on a rogue employee, but the evidence is too strong. They're just figuring out the optics of removing him." Clara felt a mix of relief and apprehension. While it was gratifying to see justice closing in on Grayson, she knew the fight wasn't over. His allies would stop at nothing to protect themselves, and Clara's role in exposing the scandal was still a closely guarded secret. Then came the knock on her door. It was late, and Clara was preparing for bed when she heard the sharp raps echo through her small apartment. Her heart raced as she approached the door, peeking through the peephole. Two men in suits stood on the other side, their expressions unreadable. "Miss Benson?" one of them asked when she opened the door a crack. "Yes? We're from the Department of Justice. We need to ask you a few questions about your employer, Keystone Industries." Clara hesitated, her mind racing. Then she nodded, stepping aside to let them in. The interview was intense but professional. The agents asked her about her role at Keystone, her interactions with senior executives, and whether she had seen or heard anything suspicious. Clara stuck to her rehearsed story, revealing just enough to corroborate the evidence without incriminating herself. When they finally left, Clara sank onto her couch, exhausted but determined. She called Regina, who reassured her. "They're building their case against Grayson. You did the right thing, Clara. Just stay strong a little longer." The following morning, Grayson's downfall began in earnest. A leaked memo revealed that the board had initiated a vote of no confidence. By midday, news broke that Grayson had been removed as CEO, effective immediately. The announcement sent shockwaves through Keystone. Employees cheered in break rooms, their long-held frustrations finally finding release. Clara kept her head down, but inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. However, the celebrations were short-lived. That afternoon, an email from the interim CEO outlined the company's plan for restructuring. While Grayson was gone, his toxic legacy remained, and the layoffs detailed in Project Phoenix were still on the table. Clara knew she couldn't let that happen. That night, she met with Regina and her team to discuss their next move. The evidence against Grayson was ironclad, but Clara wanted more than his removal. She wanted justice for the workers whose lives had been disrupted by his greed. "We need to pressure the board," Regina said. "If they think the public won't tolerate the layoffs, they'll backpedal." "How do we do that?" Clara asked. Regina smiled. "We take your story public." The idea terrified Clara. She had worked so hard to remain anonymous, but Regina was right. If the board understood the human cost of their decisions, they might be forced to change course. Over the next few days, Clara prepared for her moment in the spotlight. A reporter from a prominent news outlet interviewed her, carefully crafting a story that highlighted her courage and the sacrifices of Keystone's workers. When the article went live, it spread like wildfire. "Cleaning Lady Exposes Corporate Corruption," the headline read. Clara's phone buzzed nonstop with messages of support from strangers across the country. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as a cleaning lady, but as a force for change. The pressure on Keystone's board became unbearable. Public outcry reached a fever pitch, and investors threatened to pull their funding unless the layoffs were reversed. A week later, the interim CEO announced a new plan. Instead of layoffs, Keystone would implement cost-saving measures that preserve jobs. Clara's fight was over. With Grayson ousted and the layoffs reversed, it seemed like the dust was beginning to settle at Keystone Industries. But Clara quickly learned that taking down a powerful man didn't mean the end of the battle, it was only the beginning of a larger fight. The day after the company announced its new cost-saving measures, Clara was approached by her supervisor, Mr. Davison. A stern but generally fair man, he had always treated Clara with a distant respect. But this time, his expression was guarded, almost apologetic. "Clara," he began, shifting uneasily. "I've received some complaints about your work recently. Nothing concrete, but, well, you've been a little distracted, haven't you?" Clara blinked, caught off guard. "Distracted? Sir, I've been doing my job the same way I've always done it." He sighed. "Look, I know you've been through a lot lately. But some people upstairs are concerned about your involvement in the recent events. Just be careful, all right?" It wasn't a direct threat, but the message was clear. Someone wanted her out. Clara returned to her duties with a heavy heart. She had expected resistance from the board and executives, but this was different. These whispers, these attempts to undermine her credibility, they felt personal. That evening, she met with Regina to discuss the latest developments. "They're trying to silence you," Regina said bluntly, her eyes flashing with anger. "They know you have the ear of the media now. If they can discredit you, it'll be easier for them to sweep the rest of this mess under the rug." Clara frowned. "I'm not a threat to them anymore. Grayson's gone, and the layoffs were stopped. What else could they want?" Regina leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Grayson may be gone, but the culture he built is still here. Corruption doesn't just disappear overnight, Clara. If you want real change, you have to dig deeper." Regina's words lingered with Clara as she continued her work at Keystone. She began noticing things she hadn't paid attention to before, like the favoritism in promotions, the lack of diversity in leadership, and the quiet sidelining of employees who spoke up against unfair practices. One afternoon, Clara overheard two executives discussing plans to renegotiate a contract with a supplier. From their tone, it was clear the deal would benefit the executives personally, at the expense of the company and its workers. Clara's instincts kicked in. She couldn't let this slide. But how could she take on another fight when she was already under scrutiny? Around this time, Clara found an unexpected ally, Rachel Lopez, a young intern who had been working in the HR department. Rachel had admired Clara from afar since the story of her whistleblowing became public. One day, as Clara cleaned the HR office, Rachel struck up a conversation. "Ms. Benson," Rachel said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say, you're an inspiration. What you did, it gave people like me hope." Clara smiled, touched by the young woman's sincerity. "Thank you, Rachel. But the fight isn't over yet." Rachel hesitated before leaning closer. "I think I can help," she whispered. "There are things I've seen, emails, documents, that don't sit right with me. I don't have the power to do anything about it, but maybe you do." Clara studied Rachel for a moment, seeing both her courage and her vulnerability. "If you're willing to share what you know, we can work together. But this won't be easy, Rachel. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Rachel nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I'm sure." Over the next few weeks, Clara and Rachel quietly gathered information. Rachel provided access to internal communications and policy documents that revealed a pattern of systemic issues within Keystone. Together, they discovered evidence of wage theft, discriminatory hiring practices, and a toxic work environment that disproportionately affected marginalized employees. Clara knew this was bigger than Grayson. The problems ran deep, embedded in the very fabric of Keystone's corporate culture. But as their investigation progressed, Clara began noticing strange occurrences. Her car was keyed in the company parking lot. Anonymous notes appeared in her locker, warning her to stay in her lane. And one night, as she left work, she noticed a black sedan idling at the end of her street. Clara's fear grew, but so did her resolve. She turned to her faith, praying for strength and guidance. Naomi and her other children rallied around her, offering their unwavering support. "You've already done the impossible, Mom," Naomi said one evening. "You took down a CEO. This is just the next step." Meanwhile, Regina worked to build a coalition of allies outside Keystone. She reached out to labor unions, advocacy groups, and journalists, using Clara's story as a rallying cry for broader corporate accountability. The public's interest in Keystone's scandal reignited, putting more pressure on the company to address its deeper issues. Inside the company, however, the tension reached a boiling point. Clara and Rachel's efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. One morning, Clara arrived to find that her access badge no longer worked. Security escorted her to HR, where she was informed that her position was under review. Clara's first instinct was anger, but she quickly realized this was an opportunity. If Keystone wanted a fight, she would give them one. Clara contacted Regina, who wasted no time organizing a press conference. Standing before a room full of reporters, Clara shared her story once again, this time focusing on the systemic injustices she and her co-workers faced. "This isn't just about one bad CEO," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "This is about a system that allows people like him to thrive while hardworking employees like me are left to struggle. It's time for that to change." The conference sent shockwaves through the business world, sparking a broader conversation about corporate responsibility. Clara had turned a personal fight into a movement, and this time, she wasn't alone. The press conference had turned Clara into a symbol of justice and resilience. Across the country, her name became synonymous with standing up to corporate greed. But within the walls of Keystone Industries, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Clara's bravery had made her a target, and the company's higher-ups were determined to silence her once and for all. Clara found herself navigating a delicate balance. While public support poured in, her daily life at Keystone became a minefield. The hostility wasn't always overt, but it was there, in the way her co-workers avoided her, in the cold stares from executives, and in the sudden mistakes that appeared on her work schedule, forcing her to cover impossible shifts. The hardest blow came from an unexpected source. One of Clara's closest friends, Rosa, a fellow cleaning staff member, confronted her in the break room one afternoon. "Clara, what are you doing?" Rosa asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "What do you mean?" Clara replied, setting down her coffee. "All this attention, do you think it's helping us? People are scared, Clara. They think you're putting a target on all of us." Clara's heart sank. She had expected pushback from management, but hearing it from Rosa felt like a betrayal. "I'm doing this for us, Rosa. For everyone who's been ignored and mistreated." Rosa shook her head. "Maybe, but now we're the ones paying the price. I've got kids to feed. I can't afford to lose this job." As Rosa walked away, Clara sat alone, grappling with the weight of her actions. She had always believed she was fighting for the greater good, but was she inadvertently hurting the very people she wanted to protect? That evening, Clara met with Rachel in a quiet corner of the building. The young intern had also begun to feel the strain of their efforts. "They're watching me," Rachel whispered, her eyes darting nervously. "I found out they've been monitoring my emails and my badge scans. If they catch me, they won't." Clara interrupted, her voice firm. "We're too close to stop now." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "I hope you're right. Because if this backfires, I'll never work in this field again." Clara placed a reassuring hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Rachel. And that matters more than anything else." Meanwhile, Regina was ramping up pressure from outside. She had secured an interview for Clara with a national news outlet, a chance to reach an even wider audience. But when Clara told Naomi about the interview, her daughter's reaction surprised her. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Naomi asked, her tone cautious. "What do you mean?" Clara replied. "You've already done so much. But every time you speak out, you put yourself in more danger. Is it worth it?" Clara hesitated. Naomi's concern was valid. After all, Clara's actions had already brought threats, harassment, and isolation. But as she looked at her daughter, she thought of the future she wanted for her children, a future where people like them didn't have to fight so hard to be treated with dignity. "It's worth it," Clara said finally. "For you. For your brother and sister. For everyone who comes after us." The next day, Clara sat down for her interview. The journalist, a sharp and compassionate woman named Andrea, asked thoughtful questions about Clara's experiences and the challenges she had faced. "Clara, you've become a voice for countless workers across the country," Andrea said. "But what keeps you going, especially when the stakes are so high?" Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think about my faith," she said. "About the lessons my parents taught me, to always stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. I think about my children and the world I want them to live in. And I think about the people who don't have a voice. If I can be that voice, then it's all worth it." The interview aired that night, and the response was overwhelming. Clara received messages of support from strangers, unions, and advocacy groups, all inspired by her courage. But not everyone was pleased. At Keystone, the board called an emergency meeting to discuss the growing PR disaster. The interim CEO, along with several senior executives, argued that Clara was destabilizing the company. Some pushed for her immediate termination, while others warned that firing her would only fuel the public's outrage. "We can't let her control the narrative," one board member said. "If she keeps digging, she'll uncover things we can't afford to let go public." But another board member, a woman named Evelyn Parker, pushed back. "And what if we're the ones in the wrong?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Clara's exposing problems we should have addressed years ago. Maybe it's time we start listening instead of trying to silence her." The room fell silent, the tension thick. For the first time, cracks began to form within Keystone's leadership. That evening, Clara received an unexpected visitor, Evelyn Parker herself. The board member arrived at Clara's apartment unannounced, her demeanor calm but serious. "Ms. Benson," Evelyn began, "I know we haven't met, but I wanted to thank you for what you've done." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? That's a first." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You've forced us to confront things we've ignored for too long. I can't promise change overnight, but I want you to know, there are people on the inside who believe in what you're doing." Clara studied Evelyn, unsure whether to trust her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you're going to win," Evelyn said simply. "And when you do, I want to be on the right side of history." The meeting with Evelyn Parker lingered in Clara's mind for days. It wasn't every day that a board member of Keystone Industries, an entity she had come to view as the heart of the problem, would admit fault, let alone offer a measure of support. But Clara had learned to be cautious. Even well-meaning allies could have hidden motives. Meanwhile, the tension within Keystone was reaching its breaking point. The public backlash, fueled by Clara's continued advocacy, had turned into a storm the company could no longer ignore. Keystone's leadership scrambled to control the narrative, issuing carefully worded statements about internal reviews and a commitment to better practices. But the workers saw through the empty promises. A sense of unrest spread through the ranks, with employees whispering about strikes or even unionizing, moves that would have been unthinkable just months before. Clara continued her nightly prayers, seeking strength and clarity. One evening, as she sat by her window with her Bible open on her lap, her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Ms. Benson, I think I found something. Can we meet tomorrow?" The message was cryptic, but Clara trusted Rachel's instincts. They agreed to meet early the next morning in a secluded corner of the parking garage, away from prying eyes. When Clara arrived, Rachel was already waiting, a manila folder clutched tightly in her hands. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she passed the folder to Clara. "This is bigger than we thought," Rachel said in a hushed voice. "It's not just Grayson. He was working with the board." Clara's breath caught as she opened the folder. Inside were documents that painted a damning picture, emails, meeting minutes, and financial statements that tied several board members to the corruption Grayson had orchestrated. Offshore accounts, kickbacks from shady contracts, and evidence of efforts to suppress worker benefits were all laid bare. "This is enough to blow everything wide open," Rachel said. "But if this gets out, they'll come after us harder than ever." Clara's heart pounded. This was the smoking gun they needed to expose not just one man, but the entire system that had allowed him to thrive. Yet the risks were monumental. Clara thought of her family, her co-workers, and the young woman standing before her, putting everything on the line. "We have to act," Clara said firmly. "But we need to be smart about it. Regina was both alarmed and exhilarated when Clara showed her the new evidence. "This changes everything," she said, her sharp mind already racing ahead. "If we release this now, the board will have no choice but to step down. But they'll fight tooth and nail to keep this buried." They decided to escalate strategically. Regina contacted her media connections and several labor advocacy groups, coordinating a plan to release the documents in waves. The goal was to keep the pressure constant, preventing the board from regrouping or spinning the narrative. At the same time, Clara and Rachel began quietly sharing the information with their coworkers, building support among the rank and file. For the first time, Clara saw a spark of hope in the faces of her fellow employees. But as the momentum grew, so did the resistance. Clara began noticing strange cars parked near her apartment. Her phone buzzed with anonymous messages, some threatening, others warning her to back off. One morning, she arrived at work to find graffiti scrawled across her locker, "Traitor." Rachel faced similar harassment. Her work hours were suddenly reduced, and her supervisor began micromanaging her every move. One day, she found a note slipped under her keyboard, "You don't belong here." Clara knew they were being targeted, but she refused to back down. Instead, she turned to Evelyn Parker. If what Rachel had uncovered was true, Evelyn's position on the board put her at the center of the corruption. Their meeting was tense. Evelyn listened carefully as Clara laid out the evidence, her expression unreadable. "This is damning," Evelyn admitted. "But you need to understand something, Clara. If you release this, you won't just be taking down the board. You'll be destabilizing the entire company." "That company is already rotten," Clara shot back. "It's not about saving Keystone, it's about saving the people who work here." Evelyn sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're right," she said finally. "But if you want to see real change, you need to think about the long game. Burning everything down won't help anyone." Clara studied her, searching for any sign of duplicity. "Then help me," she said. "If you're serious about being on the right side of history, prove it." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do what I can." That evening, as Clara prepared for another restless night, her phone rang. It was Regina. "We've got a problem," Regina said, her tone urgent. "Someone leaked the story early." "What?" Clara's stomach dropped. "Who?" "We don't know yet," Regina replied. "But the board's already spinning it. They're claiming this is the work of a disgruntled employee." Clara's mind raced. Whoever had leaked the story had sabotaged their carefully planned strategy. Worse, the board's counterattack would paint Clara and her allies as troublemakers, undermining their credibility. "We need to regroup," Regina said. But this just got a lot harder. As Clara hung up, a new determination settled over her. The board might have gained the upper hand for now, but she wasn't giving up. The truth was still on her side, and she was prepared to fight for it, no matter what it took. The premature leak threw everything into chaos. Keystone's board moved quickly, releasing a statement designed to paint Clara, Rachel, and anyone associated with them as disgruntled and vindictive employees spreading misinformation. The message was clear: any further disruptions would not be tolerated. But Clara wasn't alone in the fight anymore. The evidence she and Rachel had uncovered had already begun to resonate with Keystone's workers. Employees who had once been too afraid to speak up now found their voices. Small pockets of resistance formed within the company, employees demanding transparency, better treatment, and accountability. Among them was Luis Rodriguez, a veteran warehouse manager who had worked for Keystone for over 20 years. Luis approached Clara one afternoon as she cleaned near the loading docks. "Ms. Benson," Luis began, his tone hesitant but sincere, "I just wanted to say, thank you. What you're doing, it's giving us hope." Clara smiled, grateful for the support. "Hope is a good start, but we need action, Luis. Are you ready to stand with us?" Luis hesitated, then nodded. "I've got a lot of people depending on me, but this isn't just about me anymore. Count me in." The momentum continued to build as more workers joined Clara's cause. They formed an unofficial coalition, meeting in secret after hours to discuss strategy. Rachel provided guidance on navigating company policies, while Regina advised them on leveraging public support. Clara became the de facto leader, her calm determination inspiring others to believe that change was possible. One of their first moves was to organize a petition demanding an independent audit of Keystone's financial practices and labor policies. The petition quickly gained traction, with signatures from employees across departments. But as their movement grew, so did the board's efforts to suppress it. Clara began receiving strange phone calls late at night, silent at first, then punctuated by threats. Rachel found herself locked out of her computer at work, her access revoked without explanation. And Luis reported that his supervisors had started docking his pay for minor infractions. "It's retaliation," Regina said when Clara told her about the incidents. "Classic corporate playbook. They want to scare you into backing down. They don't know who they're messing with," Clara replied, her voice steady. As the coalition prepared to submit the petition, Clara decided to confront Evelyn Parker once again. She needed to know where Evelyn stood. Was she a genuine ally, or just another piece in the board's game? Their meeting took place in a quiet cafe far from Keystone's headquarters. Evelyn arrived late, her expression guarded but not unfriendly. "You've been busy," Evelyn said as she sat down, her tone a mix of admiration and concern. "Busy trying to fix what you and the board allowed to happen," Clara replied bluntly. Evelyn didn't flinch. "You're right. We failed. And I'm not here to defend the board's actions. But I need you to understand something, Clara. Change takes time. If you push too hard, too fast, you risk tearing everything apart. That's a risk I'm willing to take," Clara said firmly. "What about you?" Evelyn hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice low. "I've been working quietly to sway the other board members. There are a few who want to see change, but they're afraid of the backlash. If we can convince them to support an independent audit, it could be the turning point we need." Clara studied Evelyn, trying to gauge her sincerity. "And why should I trust you?" "Because I believe in what you're doing," Evelyn said simply. "And because I've seen firsthand what happens when good people stay silent. I don't want to make that mistake again." With Evelyn's tentative support, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The petition was submitted the following week, garnering significant attention both inside and outside the company. The board couldn't ignore it, especially with media outlets covering the growing movement. But the fight was far from over. One evening, as Clara and Naomi drove home, they noticed a black SUV following them. At first, Clara dismissed it as paranoia, but when the SUV matched every turn they made, her unease grew. "Mom, they're following us," Naomi said, her voice tight with fear. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel. "Stay calm," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. She pulled into a well-lit gas station, hoping the visibility would deter whoever was tailing them. The SUV idled for a moment before speeding off, its taillights disappearing into the night. Naomi turned to her mother, her eyes wide. "What if they're trying to scare us?" Clara took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "Then they're wasting their time. We're not backing down." The next day, Clara shared the incident with Regina and Evelyn. Regina was furious, immediately contacting her legal team to document the harassment. Evelyn, however, looked deeply troubled. "This is escalating," Evelyn said. "The board knows they're losing control. Desperate people do dangerous things, so do determined people," Clara replied. That week, the coalition staged its first major demonstration, a peaceful march outside Keystone's headquarters. Hundreds of employees participated, their chants echoing through the city streets. Clara stood at the front, holding a sign that read, "Dignity for workers, accountability for leaders." The demonstration made headlines, further increasing public pressure on the board. But it also marked a turning point in Clara's journey. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just fighting for herself or her coworkers. She was fighting for something much bigger, a vision of justice and equality that transcended Keystone's walls. And she wasn't going to stop until that vision became reality. The peaceful march outside Keystone Industries headquarters marked a defining moment for Clara and her growing coalition. For the first time, the workers' voices reverberated beyond the company's walls, amplified by the media and supported by labor advocacy groups. Clara stood in the eye of the storm, her resolve unshaken despite the mounting threats. But Keystone's board was far from defeated. Behind closed doors, the remaining members orchestrated a counteroffensive designed to dismantle the movement and protect their own interests. The first move came in the form of an internal memo, sent to all employees the day after the march. Keystone Industries remains committed to our workforce and values your contributions. However, recent disruptions have hindered productivity and jeopardized the stability of our company. We urge all employees to focus on their roles and avoid involvement in activities that could harm Keystone's reputation and future. The thinly veiled threat hung over the workforce like a dark cloud. Clara knew it was meant to divide them, to sow doubt and fear. And for some, it worked. "I can't afford to lose this job, Clara," Louise said during a meeting of the coalition that evening. "I've got a family to think about." "I understand, Louise," Clara replied, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But if we back down now, nothing will change. And that means our kids will inherit the same broken system we're fighting against." Louise sighed, torn between fear and hope. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is hard, I know. But we're not alone anymore. If we stand together, they can't ignore us." Her words struck a chord, reigniting the determination in the room. Meanwhile, Evelyn Parker faced her own battles within the boardroom. Despite her efforts to sway other members towards supporting an independent audit, resistance remained strong. Some were deeply entrenched in the corruption, while others feared the repercussions of exposing it. "We need to get ahead of this," one board member argued during a tense meeting. "If we give in to their demands, we're admitting guilt." Evelyn countered, her voice sharp and unwavering. "If we keep stonewalling, we're just delaying the inevitable. The longer this drags on, the worse it'll be, for all of us." Her arguments fell on deaf ears. The board voted to reject the coalition's petition, a decision they announced the next day in a curt press release. The rejection was a gut punch to Clara and her allies. Anger and frustration rippled through the workforce, threatening to unravel the unity they had fought so hard to build. "They're not listening to us," Rachel said during an emergency meeting of the coalition. "What do we do now?" "We escalate," Clara replied without hesitation. The escalation began with a coordinated strike. Over 70% of Keystone's employees refused to report to work the following week, grinding operations to a halt. The strike drew national attention, with Clara emerging as its face. She delivered speeches at rallies, appeared on news programs, and met with labor leaders to garner further support. "This isn't just about Keystone," Clara told a packed crowd at a rally. "This is about every worker who's ever been ignored, mistreated, or undervalued. We're standing up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who believes in fairness and dignity." The strike sent shockwaves through Keystone. Production delays cost the company millions of dollars, and customers began pulling contracts. Investors demanded answers, and the board found themselves under siege. But the board wasn't finished fighting. In a desperate move, they filed a lawsuit against Clara and several other coalition leaders, accusing them of defamation and conspiracy to harm the company. The lawsuit was a calculated attempt to intimidate Clara and disband the coalition. For a moment, it worked. Some workers, fearing legal repercussions, withdrew their support. Even Rachel began to waver. "Maybe we've pushed too far," Rachel said during a late-night phone call. "What if they bankrupt us, Clara?" Clara was silent for a moment, the weight of the fight pressing down on her. But then she thought of her late husband's words, the ones that had carried her through every trial. "You're stronger than they'll ever see coming." "They want us to give up," Clara said finally. "But we can't. Not now." Regina mobilized her legal team, filing a countersuit on behalf of the coalition. The lawsuit turned into a media spectacle, with both sides slinging accusations. Clara found herself at the center of a storm she couldn't escape. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment, journalists bombarded her with questions, and her every move was scrutinized. Naomi and Clara's other children worried for her safety. "Mom, you don't have to do this alone," Naomi said one evening. "I'm not alone," Clara replied. "I have all of you. And I have the truth on my side. As the legal battle raged, Evelyn Parker made a bold move. She leaked an internal memo to the press, one that revealed the board's knowledge of the corruption and their coordinated efforts to suppress it. The memo was the final nail in the coffin. Public outrage exploded, and even Keystone's staunchest defenders couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. Within days, the board was forced to announce a full investigation and resign en masse. For Clara, the moment was bittersweet. She had achieved what many thought was impossible, but the fight had taken a toll on her, her family, and her community. But as she stood before a crowd of cheering workers, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. With the resignation of Keystone Industries board, Clara's movement had achieved a significant victory. News outlets hailed it as a groundbreaking moment in the fight for corporate accountability, and Clara became a national symbol of perseverance and justice. But the fight wasn't over. Keystone was still reeling from the scandal, its workers uncertain about their future. The company needed leadership, and quickly. For Clara, the question loomed: how could she ensure that the changes she and her allies had fought for would last? The answer came in a surprising form: Evelyn Parker. Evelyn reached out to Clara 2 days after the board's resignation. They met in a neutral space, a small conference room at a local community center. Evelyn looked more relaxed than Clara had ever seen her, as though shedding the weight of the corrupt board had given her a new sense of purpose. "Clara," Evelyn began, her tone warm but serious, "Keystone is at a crossroads. The company needs leadership that understands its workers and values accountability. That's why I'm asking you to consider stepping into a leadership role." Clara blinked, stunned. "Me? I'm a cleaning lady, Evelyn. I'm not a CEO." "You're more than that," Evelyn replied. "You're a leader. You've already proven that. The workers trust you. The public respects you. And most importantly, you have the integrity this company desperately needs." Clara sat back, her mind racing. The idea of stepping into a formal leadership role was daunting. She had spent her life in the shadows, invisible to the very people she now had the power to confront. Could she really navigate the complexities of corporate leadership and stay true to her principles? "I don't know," Clara said finally. "I've spent my life fighting against people in power. What if I lose myself if I become one of them?" Evelyn leaned forward, her expression earnest. "That's exactly why you should do it, Clara. You understand what's at stake. You've seen firsthand what happens when leaders forget the people they're supposed to serve. If you don't step up, someone else will, and they may not share your values." Clara left the meeting with a heavy heart, unsure of what to do. That evening, she gathered her family to discuss the opportunity. Naomi, always her staunchest supporter, was thrilled by the idea. "Mom, this is your chance to make a real difference," Naomi said. "You've already done the impossible. Why not take it further?" But Clara's eldest son, Marcus, was more skeptical. "It's a trap," he warned. "They're just trying to use you to clean up their mess, and once the dust settles, they'll push you out." The room fell silent as Clara weighed her children's words. Finally, she turned to her youngest, Kayla, who had been quiet throughout the discussion. "What do you think, baby?" Clara asked gently. Kayla looked up, her eyes shining with admiration. "I think you can do anything, Mama." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Kayla. I needed to hear that." The next day, Clara met with Regina to seek her counsel. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," Clara admitted. Regina studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Leadership isn't about knowing everything, Clara. It's about having the courage to make tough decisions and the wisdom to listen to the people around you. And you've already proven you have both." Regina's words resonated deeply. Clara realized that the fight wasn't just about tearing down corruption, it was about building something better in its place. The following week, Keystone's workers held a vote to determine their preferred candidate for interim leadership. Clara's name was on the ballot, alongside a few other candidates, including Evelyn Parker. To Clara's surprise, she won by a landslide. The workers had chosen her to guide Keystone through its most challenging chapter. On her first day as interim CEO, Clara walked into the executive suite with her head held high. The same halls she had once cleaned now felt like a different world, but Clara remained grounded. She kept her cleaning uniform tucked in her office drawer as a reminder of where she came from and the people she was fighting for. Clara's leadership wasn't without its challenges. Many of Keystone's remaining executives resisted her initiatives, dismissing her as unqualified and inexperienced. But Clara relied on the same principles that had carried her through the fight: integrity, transparency, and unwavering determination. She worked closely with Evelyn to implement an independent audit, overhaul Keystone's labor policies, and establish channels for workers to voice their concerns. She also pushed for diversity in leadership, ensuring that Keystone's future leaders reflected the workforce they served. But the toughest decision came when Clara was faced with the company's precarious financial situation. To stabilize Keystone, she would have to make significant cuts. Clara agonized over the decision, knowing that any misstep could betray the trust of the workers who had supported her. Finally, she called a town hall meeting, inviting all employees to hear the truth and share their input. "I won't lie to you," Clara said, standing before hundreds of workers. "We're in a tough spot. But I believe in this company, and in all of you. Together, we can rebuild Keystone into something we're all proud of. But I need your help to do it." The meeting sparked a wave of collaboration, with workers offering ideas for cost-saving measures that minimized layoffs. Clara was reminded once again of the power of collective action. By the end of the month, Keystone had begun to stabilize. Clara's leadership earned the respect of even her harshest critics, and the company's workers felt more empowered than ever. As Clara left the office one evening, she paused to look up at the Keystone building, its towering glass facade gleaming in the fading sunlight. She had climbed from its lowest rung to its highest, not through ambition, but through a deep and abiding love for justice. And she wasn't done yet. Clara's rise to interim CEO of Keystone Industries had shocked the corporate world and galvanized workers everywhere. But as she worked tirelessly to rebuild the company and restore trust, she knew her greatest challenge still lay ahead. The independent audit she had championed was nearing completion, and the results promised to expose the full extent of the corruption that had plagued Keystone for years. If released, the findings could solidify Clara's legacy as a transformative leader. But they also posed enormous risks. The audit would implicate not only the previous board but also several powerful outside entities, vendors, investors, and even a few government officials. Clara knew that bringing the truth to light could result in lawsuits, financial losses, and relentless attacks on her character. She had a choice: protect the company by keeping the most damaging details private, or honor her principles by revealing the full truth, no matter the cost. The audit report landed on Clara's desk one rainy afternoon. She sat alone in her office, the pages spread before her like a map of betrayal. The evidence was damning: kickbacks from contractors, illegal campaign donations, and a trail of fraudulent deals that stretched back over a decade. Clara's hands trembled as she read through the final recommendations. The auditors urged discretion in handling the findings, warning that full disclosure could lead to bankruptcy and criminal investigations. Evelyn Parker entered the room, her expression grim. "I've seen the report," she said. "It's worse than I imagined." Clara leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "If we release this, we could lose everything," she said. "But if we hide it, we're no better than the people we replaced." Evelyn nodded, her face etched with concern. "You're right. But you need to be prepared for what happens if you go public. The backlash will be brutal." "I didn't come this far to back down now," Clara said firmly. "The truth matters. It's the only way we can truly move forward." The next morning, Clara called a press conference. Journalists packed the room, their cameras trained on her as she stepped up to the podium. Her family sat in the front row, their presence a source of strength. Naomi gave her a small, encouraging nod. Clara took a deep breath and began. "Today, I'm here to share the results of an independent audit that my team and I commissioned to uncover the truth about Keystone Industries. What we've found is painful, but necessary to confront. For years, this company operated under a culture of greed and deception. The actions of a few individuals hurt countless people, from our workers to our customers to the communities we serve." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I won't stand for that. And neither should you. That's why I'm making the full audit report available to the public. It's time for accountability, not just for Keystone, but for every company that puts profits over people. The fallout was immediate. The report dominated headlines, sparking outrage across industries. Federal investigations were launched, and several former board members were indicted. Keystone's stock took a nosedive, and financial analysts predicted that the company wouldn't survive the storm. Inside Keystone, the reaction was mixed. Some employees felt betrayed, angry that Clara had exposed the company to such scrutiny. Others, however, admired her courage, recognizing that her decision was rooted in a desire for genuine change. Regina called Clara that evening, her voice brimming with pride. "You did the right thing," she said. "This is what leadership looks like." Clara smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like it right now." "It will," Regina replied. "Trust me." But Clara's challenges were far from over. The next day, a group of major investors demanded her resignation, accusing her of reckless decision-making. At the same time, a coalition of workers rallied in her support, staging a sit-in at Keystone's headquarters. "Clara stands for us," they chanted. "We stand for Clara." Caught between two forces, Clara faced another pivotal decision. She could step down, bowing to the investors' demands, or stay and risk further destabilizing the company. That evening, Clara gathered her family, Regina, Evelyn, and a few trusted colleagues. Together, they weighed the options. "If you stay, you'll be fighting an uphill battle every day," Evelyn warned. "But if you leave, you risk undoing everything you've worked for." Clara looked around the room, seeing the faces of those who had supported her through every challenge. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't come this far to quit. If they want me out, they'll have to take me out. But until that happens, I'm going to keep fighting for what's right." The next morning, Clara returned to work, greeted by cheers from the workers who had gathered in the lobby. She spent the day meeting with employees, listening to their concerns and reaffirming her commitment to rebuilding Keystone from the ground up. As she walked through the halls she had once cleaned, she felt a deep sense of purpose. This was more than a job, it was a mission. Later that week, a surprising turn of events shifted the tide. A group of ethical investors stepped forward, pledging their support for Clara and offering financial assistance to help stabilize Keystone. Their vote of confidence bolstered Clara's position and silenced her critics, for the time being. Standing in her office that evening, Clara gazed out at the city's skyline. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't walk it alone. Clara Benson stood at the heart of Keystone Industries' bustling headquarters, gazing at the employees gathered in the newly renovated cafeteria. It had been a year since the audit report had shaken the company to its core, and in that time, Clara's leadership had turned the tide. What once felt like a company on the verge of collapse now stood as a testament to resilience and transformation. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation as workers from every department mingled freely, a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchy that had once dominated Keystone. Clara had insisted on breaking down barriers between employees, introducing initiatives like open forums, profit-sharing programs, and mentorship opportunities. She wanted everyone to feel invested in the company's success, not just the executives at the top. But today was special. It marked the first anniversary of Keystone's reinvention, and Clara had planned a surprise announcement. As the crowd quieted, Clara stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. She glanced at Naomi and her other children, seated near the front, then took a deep breath. "When I first walked into this building, I was a cleaning lady," Clara began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was invisible to most people here, just another face in the crowd. But I've always believed that no matter where you start, your voice matters." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This past year has been the most challenging of my life. We've faced backlash, lawsuits, and skepticism from every corner. But we've also proven something important: that a company can succeed without sacrificing its integrity or its people." The room erupted into applause, but Clara held up a hand to quiet them. "Today, I'm proud to announce the launch of Keystone's new Worker Leadership Initiative. This program will create a pathway for employees at every level to participate in decision-making processes, ensuring that your voices are heard, not just by me, but by every leader who comes after me." The applause was deafening this time, and Clara felt tears sting her eyes as she looked out at the crowd. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not just as a leader, but as a symbol of hope and possibility. Later that evening, as the celebrations died down, Clara retreated to her office. She sat at her desk, flipping through a stack of thank you notes from employees. One in particular caught her eye. "Ms. Benson, because of you, I believe in myself again. Thank you for showing us what's possible." Clara smiled, tucking the note into her drawer alongside her cleaning uniform. It was a reminder of where she had started and the journey that had brought her here. But Clara's work wasn't done. The fight for accountability and fairness extended far beyond Keystone's walls. Over the past year, Clara had become a prominent advocate for workers' rights, testifying before Congress and partnering with labor organizations to push for systemic reforms. Her story had inspired similar movements across the country, sparking a national conversation about the value of workers and the responsibilities of corporations. One evening, as Clara prepared for a televised interview, Naomi sat beside her, scrolling through her phone. "Mom, did you see this?" Naomi asked, holding up an article titled, "From Cleaning Lady to CEO, The Woman Who Changed Corporate America." Clara chuckled. "They make it sound like I did it all by myself. But you know better than anyone, it was never just me." Naomi smiled. "No, it wasn't. But you were the one who started it." As the interview began, the host asked Clara what advice she would give to others fighting for justice in their own workplaces. "Don't let fear stop you," Clara said, her voice filled with conviction. "Fear is powerful, but so is faith. When I started this journey, I didn't know where it would lead. I just knew I couldn't stay silent. And that's what I'd tell anyone who's afraid to speak up. You're stronger than you think. And you're never as alone as you feel." The following week, Clara returned to Keystone for another busy day. But this time, something felt different. As she walked through the halls, employees greeted her warmly, stopping to share their ideas and concerns. The barriers that had once separated them were gone, replaced by a culture of openness and mutual respect. Clara paused outside the conference room, where a meeting of the Worker Leadership Council was underway. Through the glass, she saw employees from every department, cleaners, warehouse staff, engineers, and managers, sitting side by side, discussing plans for the company's future. A sense of peace washed over her. This was the legacy she wanted to leave behind, a company where every voice mattered, and every worker had a seat at the table. As Clara left the building that evening, she stopped to look up at the Keystone logo, now accompanied by the words "Built by People, for People." It was a small change, but it symbolized something much bigger. Clara's journey had taken her from the shadows to the spotlight, from invisibility to leadership. She had faced every challenge with courage and grace, proving that even the most ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. And though her path had been difficult, Clara knew she wouldn't have changed a thing. As she walked into the night, Clara carried with her the words that had guided her all along: "You're stronger than they'll ever see coming." Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience, justice, and transformation. Clara's story reminds us that courage and determination can change the world, no matter where you start. If this story inspired you, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more empowering stories. And don't forget to check out our next video for another tale of triumph and hope.